The restaurant always looked different on nights like this. The lights were softer, the tables were covered in white cloth, and the air carried that quiet pressure that came when important guests were around. She moved between the tables carefully, holding a tray close to her chest. It was not fear that made her cautious. It was simply her routine. She had learned long ago that people noticed the smallest mistakes, especially in places where everyone dressed in expensive clothes and spoke like they owned the world. She had been working here for a while, long enough to know the sounds of every corner, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of conversation, the footsteps of the manager pacing back and forth to make sure everything looked perfect. But tonight, there was another sound that kept drawing her eyes silence from the grand piano. Sitting in the center of the hall, it was a beautiful piano, polished so carefully that the lights above reflected off its surface like water. Most nights, a hired musician played soft melodies. But tonight, for some reason, the musician never came. The piano sat alone, untouched, almost like a decoration rather than an instrument. She tried not to stare at it for too long. Looking at it made her chest tighten. It reminded her of things she rarely allowed herself to think about: old dreams, unfinished memories, and quiet wishes that life had pushed aside. The guests tonight were louder than usual. They were wealthy, confident, and comfortable. They laughed deeply, talked quickly, and made jokes that they assumed everyone around them understood. Some of them barely looked at the staff. Others looked too much, watching like they were expecting something to go wrong. She kept her head down and continued her work. This was her job, and she was grateful for it. Still, she sometimes wondered what her life might look like if things had gone differently. When she passed by the piano again, one of the guests pointed at it and laughed. "That thing's just sitting there. Someone should play something decent," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. His friends chuckled. Another one joked that they could probably pull a better performance out of a random person from the street. She kept walking, pretending she didn't hear. But a few steps away, she felt the manager's eyes on her. He approached her with a half smile, the kind he only used when he wanted something. "You know a little music, right?" he said quietly. She froze for a moment. Her hands tightened around the tray. He had once heard her humming in the back room when she thought no one was around. She remembered how embarrassed she felt, how she wished she could disappear. But he had simply smiled and said she had a nice voice. "Only a little," she answered. "They want someone to play," he said, nodding toward the table of laughing guests. "Just something simple. It'll calm them down." Her heart beat faster. "I don't know if just a minute or two," he cut in gently. "Don't worry. It's just for fun." She looked at the piano again. It felt impossible. The hall was full of important people. They already looked at her like she was just part of the background. What would they say if she sat there, trying to play? "If you're not comfortable, it's okay," the manager added quickly. "I just thought it might help the atmosphere." She nodded slowly. "I can try." He gave her a small smile and stepped away. The moment she said yes, she regretted it. Her hands felt warm and shaky. Her mind raced. She was not dressed to perform. She wasn't trained for this. She was just a waitress trying to keep her job. But as she walked toward the piano, she felt something else, a quiet pull inside her, like a familiar hand gently guiding her forward. Some of the guests noticed her approaching the instrument. Their laughter changed into amusement. One raised an eyebrow. Another whispered to the person beside him. She took a deep breath and sat on the bench. The piano felt colder than she expected. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Everything around her felt louder: the forks tapping on plates, the faint hum of lights, the heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. She wished she could close them all out. Just something simple. she whispered to herself. She pressed the first key. A soft note rang out, clear and clean. It surprised her how steady it sounded. The guests barely reacted. Some kept chatting. A few leaned forward, expecting nothing special. But as her fingers rested on the keys, something shifted inside her. The familiar weight of the instrument, the feel of the smooth keys under her fingertips, the faint vibration of sound rising through her hands, it woke something she had kept buried for years. For a moment, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't surrounded by expensive clothes and judgmental eyes. She was just someone who loved music, someone who had once dreamed about sitting in front of a piano like this. She pressed another key, then another, forming a small melody, simple, calm, gentle. She kept her back straight, her breathing slow, her eyes focused on the keys. Behind her, someone sighed impatiently. Another guest laughed softly under his breath, as if he had expected something more exciting. She heard them. She felt it. But she didn't stop. She played quietly, letting her hands guide her. She tried to ignore the pressure, the room, the noise inside her mind. She tried to remember the small community hall where she used to practice, the old piano that was always missing a key, the dusty sunlight that fell across the floor. It wasn't a perfect memory. It wasn't even a happy one. But it was hers. As she continued, the sounds in the room began to fade from her awareness. Her shoulders loosened. Her fingers moved with more confidence, more familiarity. She did not notice it yet, but some of the guests were slowly turning their heads, watching with curious expressions. They had expected a clumsy attempt, something amusing to talk about later, but her hands were steady, her notes clean. The manager watched from the side with a mix of surprise and relief. She continued playing softly, trying to keep it simple just like she promised. She wasn't ready to show more. She wasn't sure if he even remembered how to. Yet a part of her wished she could go further, wished she could let go and play something real, something full of the emotion she had kept inside for so long. But this was not the place. Not yet. So she continued her soft tune, unaware that the room had grown a little quieter, unaware that several people were listening more closely than before. All she knew was the piano beneath her hands and the gentle melody floating through the hall, her own small moment in a world that rarely gave her any. And though she didn't know it, this quiet beginning would soon lead her to something far beyond anything she imagined. She didn't realize how long she had been playing until the room's noise shifted. At first, she thought it was her imagination. She was too focused on the keys, too busy trying to keep her hands steady. But slowly, she became aware of the silence growing behind her. It wasn't the heavy kind of silence that made people uncomfortable. It was lighter, curious, mixed with surprise. The kind that came when someone saw something they didn't expect, but she didn't turn around. She kept her eyes down, watching her fingers move in small, careful motions. She didn't trust herself to look yet. She felt like if she lifted her head, even for a second, everything inside her would collapse. Then she heard a faint whisper from one of the tables behind her. "Wait, she can actually play?" Another voice answered softly, "Looks like it." She heard the quiet disbelief in their tone. It didn't hurt her. She wasn't surprised. People rarely expected anything from someone wearing an apron and serving them drinks. She had learned that long ago. Still, the sound of their surprise made her chest tighten. She pressed another key, letting the note ring out a little longer. Her hands were getting used to the instrument. The piano was smoother than anything she had ever played before. The keys responded easily, as if they wanted to help her. She felt the familiar warmth spreading through her fingertips, the kind that only came when she played for more than a few minutes. She didn't plan to go further. She wanted to keep it simple, just like the manager asked. But the melody began to shift on its own. Her fingers moved a little faster, a little stronger. She didn't push them, they pushed her. She didn't want to overdo it. Not in this kind of room, not in front of these people. But something inside her kept growing. A quiet voice she had ignored for years whispered for her to let go, even just a little. Before she knew it, her tune became more than simple. It became smoother, deeper, filled with pieces of songs she used to play when she was alone. Notes blended into each other with a softness she almost forgot she could create. She heard the shift in the room again. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations faded. Even the low laughter from the table in the corner slowed down. The guests weren't mocking her anymore. They were listening, but she didn't let herself think too much about it. If she started thinking, she would stop playing. And she didn't want to stop yet. She added a small rise in the melody, a gentle climb that reminded her of evenings in the old community hall where she practiced as a kid. She remembered how the dust floated in the sunlight, how she used to rush there after school just for 10 minutes of playing. Her fingers moved faster now, but her breathing remained steady. She was slipping into something familiar, something safe. Then she heard a faint laugh from the back, not a kind laugh, not admiration, a mocking one. "There it is," someone whispered. "She's messing it up now." The sound cut into her chest like a sudden cold wind. Her fingers almost froze. But somehow she managed to hold the melody together, even though her heart dipped for a second. She reminded herself this wasn't about them. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't even about impressing anyone. She was just doing what she was asked to do. Even so, their laughter bit deeper than she wanted it to. She took a slow, deep breath and steadied her hands again. Her music softened for a moment, then gradually rose. She played a slow, calm section, letting each note settle into the air gently. She wanted to stay in control. She didn't want emotion to spill out too fast out, but it was hard. So hard. The room was completely quiet now, except for the piano. Even the kitchen doors had stopped swinging. She sensed people watching her from every corner. Some looked curious. Some looked confused. Some looked unexpectedly moved. But just a few still wore smirks. She could feel their eyes the most. She pushed those thoughts away and moved into a slightly stronger part of the melody. She didn't rush. She didn't show off. She just played the way she always did when she wanted to calm herself. Her fingers danced lightly, then slowed down again. Each shift in the music carried a small memory, though she never showed it on her face. Behind her, she heard a chair scrape the floor softly. Someone was leaning forward. Another voice whispered, "Hold on. Listen to that part." A small wave of warmth moved through her. It felt strange, like someone had placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. For the first time since sitting down, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier, but she didn't dare turn her head. Instead, she played a quieter part again. She didn't want to overwhelm herself. She didn't want to lose control. She wanted to keep the moment steady. But then, someone near the front whispered loudly, "Is this all she can do?" The words hit her hard. Harder than the laughter earlier. All she can do. They didn't understand. They saw her as a waitress pretending to be a musician. Someone performing out of place. She swallowed and kept playing. Her hands trembled for a second, but the melody stayed intact. She thought of all the times she played in empty rooms, because it made her feel something she couldn't explain. The nights she stayed up learning songs from old recordings. The mornings she woke up with music still echoing in her mind. They didn't know that she had once dreamed of more. They didn't know that this wasn't all she could do. They didn't know that she was holding herself back. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the music guide her. When she opened them again, her fingers moved with renewed calm. She let herself soften the melody, almost like she was whispering through the keys. She wanted to end the piece gently, quietly, without drawing too much attention. A few of the guests leaned back in their seats, a little disappointed that she wasn't going further, but others seemed strangely touched. Their eyes followed her hands as if they were watching something rare. She ended the short tune with a soft, delicate note. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, before she slowly lowered them to her lap. Then the room shifted again, Dot. Someone clapped once, then another, then a few more. Not loud applause, not the kind that filled an entire hall, but polite, surprised, possibly impressed. She didn't know how to feel. The sound startled her more than she expected. She stood up quickly from the bench, her legs slightly shaky. Dot. The manager gave her a small nod from the corner. A quiet thank you. A hint of pride. She stepped away from the piano, back toward the tables she had been serving only moments ago. Every step felt heavier than the last. Dot. No one said anything directly to her. Some guests looked at her with new curiosity. Others avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their earlier laughter. But a few still wore those smirks. She didn't let herself care. Dot. As she reached for a tray to continue her work. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not confidence. Not pride. Dot. But a quiet whisper inside her heart. A whisper that said she wasn't done. Something inside her had just begun to wake up, and she didn't know yet that this was only the first step toward a moment that would soon change everything for her, and for everyone watching. She went back to work as if nothing unusual had happened, even though her heart was still beating fast from the piano. She picked up plates, refilled glasses, and nodded politely when someone asked for something. But her hands felt lighter than before, and every now and then her fingers twitched with the memory of the keys. Dot. It was strange how a few minutes of playing could bring back so much. Memories she had buried years ago were now floating around her mind, soft and bittersweet. She tried to push them away, reminding herself where she was and what her job was. But emotions had their own timing. They didn't follow rules. Dot. As she moved around the hall, she sensed the way people looked at her now. Earlier, they barely noticed her unless they needed something. But after hearing her play, many were watching her with quiet curiosity. Some smiled politely. Some studied her as if trying to understand how someone like her could play like that. Others simply ignored her again, going back to their conversations. But one thing was clear. The room wasn't the same anymore. Still, she didn't let herself think too much about it. She knew how quickly moods could change in a place like this. One moment, people admired you. The next, they forgot you existed. She had learned to keep her expectations low. She carried a tray to a small group near the back. They had been whispering earlier, the ones who laughed when she first sat at the piano. As she approached, they quieted down a little. One of them raised an eyebrow. "You surprised us back there," he said casually. His tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't friendly either. It felt like he was testing her. Dot. She simply nodded and set their plates down. "I just played something simple." "Simple," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Doesn't seem like the right word." She didn't answer. She didn't want to get caught in a conversation that might turn into mockery again. She stepped back, bowed her head slightly, and walked away. "She's shy," she overheard someone whisper as she left. "Or she's hiding something," another voice replied. "Or she just had a lucky moment." She ignored them and went on with her tasks. Across the hall, the manager signaled for her to come over. She approached him quickly. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yes, I'm fine." "They liked it," he said with a small smile. "Some did," she answered. He laughed a little under his breath. "Don't worry about the others. People like them always talk." "You did good." His words warmed her slightly, but she didn't let them sink too deep. She had learned not to rely too much on praise. It disappeared too easily. The rest of the evening passed slowly. The guests continued eating, drinking and laughing. The atmosphere relaxed more than usual, almost as if her playing had softened the room's sharp edges. She didn't play again, but the memory of the moment stayed in the air, like a soft smell that lingered longer than expected. Every once in a while, someone asked the manager about her, thinking she couldn't hear. Where did she learn to play? Is she trained? Does she perform somewhere? He didn't have answers, so he stayed vague. She tried not to react when she heard these questions. She didn't want to seem affected, but inside she felt something moving, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A small, trembling hope. As she cleared a table near the front, she noticed a man watching her with focused eyes. He wasn't dressed like the others. His clothes were simple, but the way he observed things made him look different. Calm, thoughtful. She didn't know who he was, and she didn't want to stare, so she simply nodded politely and continued working. But as she moved past him again, he spoke softly. "You play beautifully." She froze for a second. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like the others who spoke loudly for others to hear. His tone was calm, sincere. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Do you perform anywhere?" He asked. She shook her head. "No, I only play sometimes." "You should consider doing more than sometimes," he said with a small smile. She didn't know how to respond. Compliments always made her feel awkward, especially from strangers. She nodded slightly and stepped away before the conversation grew uncomfortable. The man watched her for a few seconds longer, then turned his attention back to the room. She didn't know it, but he wasn't just another guest. He was someone important, someone who had the power to change people's lives with just a few decisions. But to her, he was just another face in the crowd. As the night went on, more guests prepared to leave. Coats were collected, bills were paid, and the room slowly emptied. The soft music from the speakers replaced the quiet melody she had played earlier. She could still feel it echoing faintly inside her when the last group stood up to leave. The one who had mocked her earlier walked past her with a small smirk. "Not bad for a waitress," he said. The words stung a little, but she didn't react outwardly. She gave a polite nod, even though the comment sat in her chest like a stone. The manager noticed her expression as he walked by. "Don't listen to people like that," he said gently. "They say things without thinking." She exhaled slowly. "I'm fine. You sure?" She nodded again, but deep down, she wasn't sure at all. After the last guests left, she helped clean up the tables. The hall felt strangely big and empty compared to earlier. The piano sat quietly again in the middle, its surface reflecting the overhead lights. She walked past it slowly, letting her hand glide along the edge. The wood felt warm from the lights above. She wished she could sit down again and play something longer, something that belonged to her heart, rather than the room. But she didn't, not tonight. She was about to walk away when she noticed someone standing by the door. It was the thoughtful man from earlier. He raised a hand slightly to get her attention. "Do you have a minute?" Her heart skipped a beat, but she nodded and approached him. He spoke in a gentle tone. "Earlier, when you played, it wasn't just decent. You have real control, real emotion. That's not common." She didn't know what to say. Compliments like that felt too big for her. "Thank you," she murmured. "I want to ask you something," he continued. "Would you ever consider playing somewhere outside this restaurant? Even a small event?" She froze. No one had ever asked for something like that before. I don't know," she said hesitantly. "I've never really think about it," he said kindly. "You have something rare. Don't let it disappear." He gave her a small card, nodded respectfully, and walked out. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the card in her hand. Her chest felt tight, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of tightness that came when life suddenly offered something unexpected. The manager walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. "Everything okay?" She nodded slowly. "He just said something nice." The manager smiled warmly. "You deserve it." She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't even know if she had the courage to call the number on the card. But something inside her had shifted tonight, and even if she didn't want to admit it yet, a part of her knew this was not the end out. It was the beginning of something she wasn't ready for, but maybe something she needed. The next morning felt different for her. The restaurant was quieter than usual, with just a few regulars coming in for coffee and pastries. The memories of last night's performance were still fresh in her mind. She kept thinking about the man who had approached her, the card he had handed her, and the words he had spoken. She was nervous. The idea of playing for someone outside the restaurant, in front of people who actually expected to hear something from her, was both exciting and terrifying. She didn't know if she was ready. She didn't know if she could perform the way she did last night. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. The kind of chance that only comes once, if at all. As she served coffee and breakfast to a few early guests, she kept glancing at the piano in the corner. It looked so ordinary now, yet it held all of last night's magic within it. She ran her fingers lightly along its surface, remembering the way the keys had felt under her touch. The day passed slowly. She went about her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano and the card. She tried to imagine herself playing in front of an audience that was expecting her talent, rather than mocking it. It was a strange, almost frightening thought. Finally, when the restaurant had quieted down, she sat at the piano. She didn't intend to perform for anyone. She simply wanted to feel the keys beneath her fingers, to remember the rhythm, the feeling of music flowing through her. Her fingers hesitated for a moment over the first key. She took a deep breath and pressed it. The note rang out softly, filling the small hall. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her. Slowly, she moved into a melody that she had played countless times alone. A melody that spoke to her deepest emotions. For the first time, she allowed herself to play not just to meet someone's expectations, but for herself. She let the notes swell, let the music take over her body and mind. She forgot the tables, the guests, the staff. She was alone with the piano, and that was enough. As she played, she imagined the rich crowd from last night, but this time she didn't see them laughing or whispering. She saw them silent, attentive, fully immersed in her music. She let herself imagine the awe in their eyes, the respect that hadn't been there before. Hours passed without her noticing. The sun had shifted in the sky, and the restaurant staff started tidying up for closing. She finally stopped, her fingers hovering over the final note before she gently pressed it. Letting it fade. She sat back and let out a deep breath. Her chest felt lighter, her mind clearer. The music had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing. Confidence, a sense of purpose. Just then, her manager walked in from the kitchen, noticing her sitting at the piano. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I just wanted to play." He smiled, but it wasn't the polite smile he usually gave. It was genuine. "I can tell. You have a gift. Don't let anyone make you doubt it." His words stayed with her as she finished her shift and left the restaurant. Outside, the evening air was cool, brushing her face softly. She held the card in her hand, staring at it. It was a simple card, but it represented so much: a possibility, a chance, a future she had never dared to imagine. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she had the courage to call the number, to play for strangers in a way that might change her life forever. But she did know one thing. The music was inside her, waiting. The next few days were a mixture of routine and anticipation. She continued her work at the restaurant, serving guests, cleaning tables, and moving silently through the hall. But in her mind, she was planning, imagining, practicing. Every spare moment, she touched the piano, letting her fingers move through the familiar keys. She imagined the performance she could give, the music flowing from her hands, the audience's reaction, the way their silence would make her heart race. She imagined herself stepping into a new world, one where people didn't see her as just a waitress, but as someone who could inspire, move, and astonish. Finally, she made a decision. She picked up the card and dialed the number. Her hand trembled as she waited for someone to answer. When the voice came on the other end, calm and friendly, she felt a mixture of fear and excitement. "Hello?" she said softly. "Hello," the man replied. "Did you get my card?" She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yes. Would you like to come in and play for a small group this week?" he asked. Just a simple gathering, nothing too big. Her heart leaped. Yes, I would like that," she said. They arranged the details, and she hung up the phone. The restaurant felt quieter, softer, almost like it was holding its breath for her. She walked to the piano one last time that evening, pressing a few keys, letting the notes float into the air. She smiled softly to herself. Tomorrow, the world might see a different side of her, and she was ready, at least a little. The quiet anticipation filled her with warmth, a sense of excitement that had been missing for years. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, her life could change in ways she had never imagined. The piano in the restaurant no longer felt like a piece of furniture. It was a door, a gateway to a new world, a symbol of her talent and determination. She touched the keys gently, imagining the music she would play, the people who would listen, and the life that might be waiting for her beyond this room. And as the sun set outside, casting warm light across the floor, she felt something she had never felt before: hope. The day of the performance arrived, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves that she had never experienced before. She dressed simply, in clothes that made her feel comfortable, rather than flashy outfits to impress anyone. She carried the card with her, along with a small bag, and tried to focus on each step she took, telling herself to breathe. When she arrived at the venue, it looked nothing like the restaurant. It was a small, elegant space, filled with a handful of people who had gathered for a private music event. Some were musicians themselves. Some were guests who simply loved music. Everyone looked calm, expectant, and curious. Her heart raced as she stepped into the room. The man who had given her the card greeted her warmly. "You made it," he said, with a friendly smile that eased her tension slightly. "Yes," she replied softly. "Thank you for inviting me." He nodded. "Just play. Nothing fancy. Just you and the music." She walked toward the piano, feeling its familiar weight under her fingers. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath. The keys were smooth, just like the one at the restaurant. It felt like coming home. She pressed the first note. It rang out clearly. She began with a simple melody, one she knew well. But as her confidence grew, she allowed the music to expand. She let herself play with more depth, more emotion, more complexity. The notes flowed from her hands like a river, gentle at first, then strong and powerful, carrying with them all the years she had spent practicing in silence. The audience was silent. Every note, every pause was felt deeply. No one whispered. No one moved. The air seemed to vibrate with the music itself. She had never played for people who listened this way. The quiet was different from the polite silence at the restaurant. This was attention, respect, and genuine awe. She didn't look up. She let the music speak for her. Her fingers danced across the keys effortlessly, yet every movement was filled with care and thought. She remembered the times she had practiced alone, the nights spent imagining an audience, the hopes she had quietly kept alive. Now those hopes were alive in the room, reflected in the attentive faces before her. The man who had invited her watched closely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He just let her play, understanding that what she was doing could not be forced or guided. It had to come naturally. As the music grew more intense, some of the guests shifted in their seats. Their expressions changed from curiosity to wonder. One of them, an older woman with a gentle face, closed her eyes and let the melody wash over her. Another, a young man with a notebook in his lap, jotted down notes, inspired by the rhythm and flow. She was lost in the music, unaware of time passing. She was aware of the audience only as a part of the experience, not as judges or critics. Their presence was a mirror, reflecting her own emotions back at her in ways she hadn't expected. She moved into a softer section, letting the notes float like feathers in the air. She thought of the restaurant, the crowded hall, the moments of laughter and doubt. She let all of that emotion blend into the music. Each chord carried a story, each pause a memory. A few of the guests exchanged glances, astonished at the depth and maturity of her performance. They had expected a casual, simple piece. They were not prepared for the richness and feeling that she brought. The music seemed to transform the room, filling it with a quiet magic that made everyone hold their breath. When she reached the final section, she slowed the tempo gradually, letting the last notes linger in the air. Her hands hovered for a moment over the keys, savoring the silence that followed. Then she pressed the last note softly, and it faded into stillness. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. The audience was still, almost afraid to break the spell. Then, slowly, a round of applause began. One by one, the guests clapped, their expressions filled with admiration and delight. The sound grew until the room was alive with appreciation. She stood up slowly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The applause was not for a waitress who tried her best. It was for a musician who had shared her soul through the piano. It was a recognition of talent, courage, and heart. The man who had invited her stepped forward. "You were amazing," he said simply. "I knew you had something special, but this was beyond what I expected." She felt a lump in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She nodded, too moved to find words. Guests approached her one by one, offering compliments and congratulations. Some asked if she performed professionally. Some wanted to know if she could play at other events. Each word felt like a confirmation of everything she had hoped for, a proof that her talent was real and valuable. She smiled softly, responding humbly, but inside, she felt a deep joy that she had never experienced. All the doubts, the fears, the long years of practice alone, they all led to this moment. She had not only played for herself, but she had touched the hearts of others. After the event, she walked out into the cool evening air, carrying a sense of calm pride. The streets were quiet. The world seemingly paused in respect for what had just happened. She clutched the small card in her hand, now a symbol of opportunity, courage, and transformation. For the first time in her life, she realized that her music could take her places she had never imagined. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge to a life filled with possibility. As she walked home, she thought of the restaurant, the crowded hall, the people who had laughed and doubted her. She smiled softly. They hadn't understood yet, and that was fine. They were part of her past. Now she had stepped into a new world, a world where her talent and passion could shine freely. The night air felt alive with potential. She knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them, the courage to share her music, and the skill to make a difference with every note she played. And in that quiet, calm realization, she finally felt free. Free to play, free to dream, free to live the life she had always imagined. The applause, the admiration, the recognition, they were all wonderful. But the true victory was the discovery of her own power, her own voice, and the knowledge that she could change her life, one note at a time.